Good evening and welcome to the January 11th, 2023 Cincinnati Public School Audit Committee. Thank you to those joining us in person and virtually. I would like to get started with some general Audit Committee updates. The first of those will be some procedural items around member reappointments. So we do have 3 members who are up for reappointment. Those are Jim Crossett, myself, and Liz Guttridge. So procedurally here, what we need to do is have any discussion over whether or not to reappoint said members. All 3 have shown interest in being reappointed. So if there's any discussion about reappointing those members, we can have that now. And if there is no discussion, then we can go to a yes/no vote for reappointment for those members. So I'll give a couple seconds here for anyone to raise their hand if they have any discussion topics for those 3 reappointments. Okay. Were you raising your hand? Okay, I saw your.
Putting my glasses back
up. Okay, so we'll start with Jim Crossett. All in favor of reappointing Jim Crossett, say aye. Any opposed? Okay. Reappointment for myself, Dan Holthouse. I'll abstain, I think, would be the appropriate thing to do. So all opposed to reappoint Dan Holthouse, say aye. Aye. Sorry, did I say opposed?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
I'm like, he's trying to catch us in a trick here.
All for reappointment of Dan Holthouse, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. And all for appointment of Liz Guttridge, say aye. 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 Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. So all 3, Jim Crossett, Dan Holthouse, and Liz Guttridge, have been reappointed to the Audit Committee meeting for another term of 3 years. Okay, so the next item of procedure is Tim Heldman has decided to step down as the chair of the Audit Committee. So that leaves the chair position open. And then we also have a vice chair election to do as well. So we have had some reach out over the last 3 to 6 months on who had interest in both positions, with Tim stepping down. I have put my name in for the chair position. So I'm going to leave it to board member Craig to run the chair and vice chair election procedure. We also have, I would like to nominate Liz Guttridge to the vice chair position, as that would theoretically, if no one else opposes me at chair, it would leave the vice chair position open as well. So, but certainly there is room here for discussion and also for additional nominations if others are interested in either position. So at this point, I'll turn it over to member Craig and recuse myself from that discussion and running an election of myself, because I don't think that would be appropriate. So, board member Craig.
Alrighty. So I will start by, again, allowing for, I think we have 1 person who's expressed an interest. Do we have someone who wants to nominate you, or you want to nominate yourself for president or for chair?
I guess I'll nominate myself. Is that appropriate?
Anyone else expressing interest in chair? No? Okay. Then I guess we can do just with a voice vote. All in favor of Dan Holthouse as the new incoming chair of the Audit Committee, say aye. Any opposed? All righty. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You want to say anything before we move on to the question?
No, I think we can move on.
All righty.
Thank you, I guess.
And then for vice chair, we have a nomination now for Liz Guttridge to be vice chair. Any other nominations? No. All righty. All in favor of Liz to be the incoming vice chair, say aye. All opposed? All righty. Congratulations, Liz.
Okay, one last procedural item. We did have a member of the audit committee resign her position. Jen Kauser, beginning, I guess, with this meeting, is no longer part of the audit committee. In our charter, we do have the option to go through a process of finding and electing additional members. Unfortunately, with the way the December meeting took place or didn't take place because of some COVID illness, and pushing the meeting into January, and then the procedures that have to go through where we vet members, potential members, we vote on potential members of our recommendation to appoint them. Then that goes to, I believe, either the board or to the finance committee or both. We would probably not get a new member in place until April or possibly even the next meeting. And so we do have the option to go through that process if we would like. At this point, it's my recommendation that we forego that for another year, consider filling her position in December of next year, where we would go through the normal process. But certainly it is up to this body to make that decision. So if there's any other discussion that we want to have around whether or not we want to go through this process, we can certainly have that now.
May I speak?
Yes.
Chair? Is there just a couple of different windows when we can add new members, or can we add somebody during the year sometime?
We set up this schedule to allow us to go through that process. I don't think our charter says we must adhere to this. Is that correct, Lauren?
Yeah, so the typical structure is, as someone is expiring their term, we ask them in October, as we do with you this year. Then we would, if someone were to not sign up for another term, we would interview, and then we'd come to the December meeting with proposed candidates. Since this was a resignation and it's a little off our typical schedule, what we could do if we wanted to move forward is essentially give them a little less than a 3-year term, so they'd still end on like a 12/31. So they'd still fall in some form of mat of our structure. That's an option if the committee would like, just so that way everybody does at least expire at the end of a calendar year. But like you said, you could revisit this at any point between now and the end of the year as well.
My view is to kind of wait a year, but it sounds like if we find somebody, if somebody has shown some interest during this year, that we could tolerate them joining mid-year.
I think the last few members came through the online application process. Maybe Paul was a referral, I think, but I think we can always be open to new members. We have room for new members if the right candidate came across.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, so essentially the decision, if we did want to open up to potentially receiving applications, is that it would go through our communications office as kind of an equitable reach out to the community for anyone who would be interested. So if that's something, that's kind of the decision at hand now. Do we want to make that public outreach for applications, or whatever the direction is, just to kind of add that as a consideration?
I guess given that public outreach, the necessity of that my thought would just be wait a year, go through our regular schedule, and if somebody does come up, then they're free to attend the meetings and see what we do, and then go through the application process. Any other thoughts? Okay, so moving on, we have financial updates and inquiries. So the last couple meetings we've talked about arming ourselves with more information about the district so that we're more informed as a committee when we come to this meeting, because we do only meet a handful of times a year. Some of the discussion that we've had in the past is that we do appreciate the information that is provided to us, and but none of us are educators. Most of us are not educators. And so we do bring a specific skill set to this committee, and that's why we exist. So we talked about asking audit committee members to begin watching either the finance, budget, and committee or growth committee, either reading the minutes or watching the videos online or watching board meeting minutes. And so in an effort to at least be the first volunteer, I did that. So I did watch the December 16th Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee, and it was interesting. There was a lot of discussions around the contracting process. There were discussions around real estate, preschool promise, and expansion. I mean, those were like the three main topics. And initially, when we were talking about these are just kind of my general takeaways from that process. I expected to get in there and hear a lot of numbers, a lot of finance. The nerdy accountant in me was like, all right, I'm going to get to learn school financing, right? And it really was way more than that. And it was less of the numbers and more of there was a lot more operational things in there that I wasn't expecting to find. So initially I thought, I would write up an email and I would share it with the group of like my takeaways and help this group consume more information in a more speedy process than sitting through an hour and a half video. But what I took away was that, I'm not an educator. We're not educators. And so I think it would be important for us to consume more information around the district to help us be a better value add to the district in this capacity. So I don't have the silver bullet on what I think we should do because I don't want to mandate. The board members meet a lot in a lot of different committees, and I would be very reluctant to mandate you must watch X amount of hours of videos of all these committees because that's a big lift. But I think my takeaway is that I would recommend the audit committee members consider watching some of these videos to get a different perspective of all the different things that the board members talk about and think about and talk through, and try to find ways for us to educate ourselves more on what's going on in the district so that we can provide more value in the hour and a half that we meet 6 times a year. So I don't have much more to add than that. I would happily open the floor to any comments or thoughts on what that looks like. But again, I'm very reluctant to mandate additional time, but I do think it would be valuable for our education purposes. Questions or thoughts?
Originally, I believe we kind of tossed around the idea of, hey, minute 12, there's some very poignant parts that I believe would be beneficial. So, it would consolidate the hour and a half to maybe 10, 3-minute pieces that were very maybe important for us to know about. I mean, is there any thoughts around that, or is it more just, kind of get after it on your own?
I think the struggle with that is that meeting to me, and I only watched one of those videos. It was a very informal meeting where there was very good dialogue of not just the board members talking, but members of administration. And I think to boil it down to like minute 12 was really good and minute 38 was really good, it would be rather difficult, I think. That was talked about though. Could we highlight like where does the finance part start? And it was kind of just interlaced all throughout, but it was very heavy operational. And so I'm certainly open to more discussion around this because I think it is valuable for how we can arm ourselves to be a better asset to the district. But again, like I said in my opening remarks, I don't have the silver bullet. Okay, if nothing more on that topic, we might leave that as an open topic. Lauren, on the agenda, just because I think I might continue to watch some of them to see if I can glean any more additional information. And so if we leave that on the agenda going forward, and we could talk about that in our planning discussions.
Absolutely. And I will also resend a link. I've tried to put, since pieces are kind of all over in different places on the website, I put together a Google Doc that includes the recording of the meeting. So I'd link to YouTube for all the Finance and Growth Committee meetings, as well as their agendas and the meeting minutes. So I'll continue to update as those things are posted. So hopefully in terms of ease of access, you just hop in that Google Doc and at least you can click through and kind of play around and look through the pieces that are most interesting. And I think that's probably a great spot to start as we get to our February meeting.
Okay, Jen, you're online. I kick it over to you for the discussion on the finance videos in town hall.
And good afternoon, everyone. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there today in person. Can you everybody hear me okay? Yep. Okay, good. So, that's a really good segue into your comments, Dan, about learning more about school finances. That December committee meeting is not a typical one. It's just once or twice a year. The other committee meetings are when we do go over some financials, but it's not a bunch of numbers. It's more charts and graphs. Simply because I learned along the years that public consumption of financial information is better in pictures than numbers. But we have started an effort this year to be better at publicly engaging on financial matters. And so we started doing financial town halls. We did a couple last year and 2 this year already. The third one is next Tuesday, and that's centered around the budget. So typically what happens is we'll have 2 or 3 people on stage sitting in chairs. So it's very informal, kind of like the View show or something. We'll throw a couple slides it's very topical. So we'll throw a couple slides up on the screen to introduce the topic, provide some basic information, and then let people just chat in or call or even come in person and ask questions. And we just pass the mic around. We've gotten some really good feedback on it. In terms of success, when I used to do those public presentations, I had get 2 or 3 people in the audience. And I think the first one that we did on a town hall that was on Blue Jeans and Facebook Live, we had over 600 people participate. And so we're really excited that there's a lot more, and they're asking great questions. And so and they're posted on our website. The last one we did, I unveiled a brand new tool that we've done. It's a whiteboard animation video. Has anybody seen it? It's just a 3-minute video. So I think, Rob, are you prepared to run it?
Yes, we can play it.
Okay, so yeah, go. It's just a 3-minute video, and I've gotten really cool feedback on it, and so we're really excited that we're starting to do this, and I'll tell you about some other ones that we're getting ready to do. So go ahead and run it, Rob. Thanks.
Ever wonder why school districts never seem to have enough money? Do you keep hearing about school districts asking about more property taxes? To answer both these questions, let's take a look at how school districts in the state of Ohio are funded. In Ohio, the state expects that our local taxing districts will be financially responsible for supporting local control since we're operated by locally elected board members. This means the state of Ohio shares the funding of schools with each public school district's elected board. The big problem with the state's method of distributing the K-12 public education budget to each district is its dependence on property taxes, which are based on wealth, which varies for each district in Ohio. The state of Ohio recently adopted the Fair Funding Formula, which attempts to fund K-12 students enrolled in a public school based on the total number of students enrolled alongside the conditions of students. These conditions include students with disabilities, English language learners, gifted students, career tech, and students who are economically disadvantaged. Once they factor in these conditions with the total number of students for the current school year, they determine the total funding distribution for each district. So for the 2022-2023 school year, the state of Ohio's base formula generated a total of $396,955,075 for Cincinnati public schools. Now, even though the state has determined the total amount needed for schools, this doesn't mean they'll fund the full amount. The state will only pay 40.72% of the $396 million necessary. It's up to the district's residents to pay the remaining 59.28%, meaning our local taxpayers will have to make up the difference of $235,302,782 that the state of Ohio will not pay. One of the largest ways that Cincinnati raises these local funds for schools is through property tax levies. Levies are voted by local voters and can cover multiple years if approved. Property taxes in the state of Ohio are calculated through a millage rate equal to 1/1000th multiplied by the assessed value of a home. Simply put, the higher a property is assessed for, the more tax the homeowner will have to pay that goes back to schools. Other districts will have a different state-local ratio dependent on their wealth index. To summarize, for every dollar Cincinnati's enrollment raises, the state pays 41 cents, while the district must raise 59 cents, and with the majority of that funding coming from property taxes.
So was that cool? Yeah. So we're trying to do that more often. Right now I'm working on the second one. It's on how does a school budget get built, just an individual school, to help parents understand how they're funded. So we've got a lot of great feedback, and we're hoping to do a lot more to help inform and educate our voting public, and to keep supporting us. 2 new pieces of information since the last time we met. We were notified by the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, that we won the Financial Reporting Award again. I think this is the district's 15th or 18th year. And then just on Monday night, our Fitch credit rating agency sent out a press release saying that they are supporting our AA rating, and then we have a stable outlook. Which is great. So that was the bond rating that we've had, and a joy to credit rating. And we like to brag because it's better than the cities. So that was really great news, and I wanted to share that with you. So with that, I'll pass it on to, is that Board Member Craig? Are you filling in for Eve?
Yes. Let me just start by saying the work that Jen's been doing with the town halls has been tremendous. We've had a lot of really positive feedback. But one of the things that it's also doing is explaining stuff to folks that don't always understand why the district has to make difficult decisions. So that has been a tremendous help for us in that work. The big updates that we have from a district is that we did our committee assignments elections. Myself and Board Member Bolden will be returning onto the Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee. Mike will be leaving us. However, Dr. Kareem Moffitt will be joining on. We also re-elected Ben Lindy as Board President. I was elected as Board Vice President. So me adding on to the leadership structure there. And then we did, as part of our governance that we've been working on for the last 6 months or so, we had moved the student achievement committee into the committee of the whole. And so when we went through this time around, we made sure to restructure ourselves based on the committee structure that we have now. So as part of the things that we will be doing, as well as to redo our bylaws and stuff to match up to what our current committee structure is, since we moved one of the committees onto the committee of the whole general meeting, since it's student achievement is something we felt that everybody should be a part of that discussion around. So those are the major updates we have from what we have from this first year's meetings.
And Mr. Craig, I also included the goals and guardrails documents in there. I don't know if there's any, not to put you on the spot, but just for folks to know, I think that was recently passed, and I did include a copy for them.
Yes, no, and I probably should have remembered this since I was helping spearhead it. So We took a lot of effort to go through and have more than 25 different conversations with community partners, students, parents, leaders, faith leaders, business leaders, to really get an idea of what their opinions of with the audit committee as a whole. And so in December, we went through the process of really looking at what those recommendations were, what that feedback was. It was more than 400 people who did the survey. And so as a result, we created our goals and guardrails. So we had our 5 goals and our 6 guardrails. Again, most of them are substantially similar. We changed some language based on some of the feedback we got to make sure that we were properly representing and properly communicating what we were striving for. We combined one of the guardrails and then actually added a couple additional guardrails to make sure that we were paying attention to things such as absenteeism and how it affects student achievement and student outcomes, as well as making sure that we are ensuring that all the work that's done in the district is done in a manner that respects and appreciates each person's individual value. And so I think we came up with a great list of 6 that is really focused on the values that the community set for us as far as our guardrails. And our goals are really set on really defined things that we can, that we will be striving to achieve to show that our students are achieving at the space that we want them to, right? So we're looking at things like 3rd grade reading proficiency. We're looking at things like passing Algebra 1 proficiency, which is a requirement in order to graduate. So we really did focus on a lot of the areas that we heard a lot of good feedback on. We will be continuing to keep these type of conversations happening within the community so that we're ensuring that we're living up to those expectations as well as setting a vision for going forward in the district. What you also see on there are the interim goals and guardrails, and those are just the interim points in which the superintendent is defining. Part of the governance philosophy that we looked at is that the role of governance means that we set the path that we want to get to, the goal that we want to get to. It's the superintendent's responsibility to set how she gets to those goals. So those are those interim goals that she included in there. Once again, as we move through these years, those potentially can change as we see, growth happening or we see challenges there. But it really was focused around what are the things that we see that are most important for our goals. What do we see that are most important as far as what are the values of the district community speaking to us? So what we did make a slight, that's one of the changes that we made. What we instead changed it to is we initiated a conversation in the guardrails as the superintendent will not, and then what we listed in there are different value statements that we felt that in the superintendent's role and responsibilities to provide great education for our students, these are the things that we're saying we don't want her to get to step outside the bounds of. Because the true goal of the guardrails was that we wanted to make sure that we're not telling her how she does it, but making sure that she understands the values that we are trying to espouse from the community. And so the 6 guardrails, again, start with the superintendent will not ignore the needs and the talents of the whole child by providing for students' mental and physical well-being through academics, the arts, athletics, civic engagement, career opportunities, and leadership development. The superintendent will not allow discriminatory or culturally insensitive disciplinary treatment that results in the disproportionate punishment among students to go unaddressed. Not allow the district communication to be unresponsive or lacking in conclusive transparency, community sensitivity, or inconsistent with the expressed values of the district. Will not propose or recommend the acquisition or distribution of resources that are unanalyzed or unrated for quality, or that the favored status granted to local women and minority marketplace providers of goods and services. Will not ignore district-wide chronic absenteeism at school sites, paying special attention to family involvement, and will not, in pursuit of equity, ignore the value and number of community partnerships, community access to the facilities, and decision-making at school sites. Microphone is on.
Did you determine how you're going to evaluate each one of those?
So with the guardrails, the superintendent will also produce a set of interim guardrails. What our purpose is in looking at those is really to determine whether or not any actions that we're doing as a district run afoul of those. And so we will look at what she's doing in response to some of those issues in particular. There were no specifics as far as measurables attached to guardrails in the same way that we do with the goals, and that those are things that we specifically defined as things to achieve.
For the goals, I noticed some of them have some pretty significant increases in percentages. Are those is the ultimate goal and then the interim goals, are those set by the board? Are they something that, you know, the superintendent has sort of had input into what she thinks that can be achieved in those years?
So all of the goals were a collaborative effort between the board, the superintendent, as well as the treasurer. And so, yes, some of the goals, especially things like the graduation rates, push the boundary. But one of the things that we somewhat said at the beginning, doing this process, and then kept coming up throughout the process, is that we didn't want to set small goals that were so easily achievable that they weren't really something that stretched you. And so while these are our goals, and while we will continue to stretch to reach those goals, we do understand that other factors come into play, right? And so if you looked at our goals from 2018, I don't think anybody would have said in 2020 we would have kids not in school. It's a factor. And so those things will require us to adjust along the path. But our ultimate goal is that some of these things are easily achievable if we do the right steps in place. And I think that's where the superintendent is really focused her effort. I had one other thing, is that none of the 5 goals we have are not the only things that the district's doing, and are not the only focal points of the district. These are just 5 things that we can sit down and say, if we do these things, we will see measurable success in student outcomes.
Real quick, thank you, Liz. I was going to bring that point up. Very good goals. It would help, at least for me, being the newest member, if I could get some context on what these percentages look like in 2018, 2019. And then, as Dan said earlier, just the accounting nerd in me saw a slight discrepancy. Goal 1, you have a 3 percentage point increase for 2014, 2015. And then 2016 and 17, you have a 5 percentage point increase. Am I seeing that correctly, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's how it is. I think it's actually because of, so one thing with all the interim goals is these were set before we had the numbers that we just got back in December. So some of these will have to be adjusted based on where we actually are starting from. Because all the interim goals and all of the goals are starting from June of 2023. So there is a likelihood that in our June numbers, it will come out at a different point, at a starting point, and then we will go from there. But those are the interim goals are things that can be adjusted based on the superintendent's information that comes to her and other factors that would happen.
I do think Paul is correct, though.
Yes.
You got some math errors there.
Yes, those will be corrected.
Any other questions?
I did have one other quick question. So I was watching the December Finance Committee meeting. I thought the whole discussion that you had around the review of contracts was very interesting. It sounds like a very exciting project. One question I had was just to clarify. So I forget what the exact numbers were, but so many contracts were reviewed, and I think there was 100 and something that they wanted to continue, and 3 that were recommended not be renewed. So I just wanted to get a little clarity on what the process is going to be for evaluating those, because I understand that those, evaluations were created by the people that kind of own or use those contracts. So who's going to decide, which contracts get renewed, which don't, and is there going to be some sort of, because that just to me seemed like a very low number to get rid of. It's almost like, what's the point if you're only going to pick a couple off of the bottom? So I'd be interested to hear more about what the plan is for what comes next in those.
Can I respond? So there is 884 contracts. The ones we shared at Finance Committee were only the ones that were over 200,000. There was 162 of those. The 3 out of the 162 were being terminated. There's probably 10 or 12 more of those that are still under review because not enough data was in. The rest of them, the ones that said we were going to keep, were identified with physical measures that we can determine whether we're getting the bang for our buck instead of just we're just happy that they're here and doing work for us. So are they really increasing outcomes? Are they really increasing attendance or decreasing discipline or third grade reading, so to speak? The under 200s, which is the bulk of the rest of the contracts, is under review now, and we're coming back to Finance Committee to talk about those. Same thing. There's a lot that are being terminated under those. We're not finished with them. Our next Finance Committee is next Friday, so we'll have recommendations for those, and then things that we're still collecting. So just because the data doesn't come in perfectly in the right windows, some of them we have to wait to make a decision, but this is our way of determining a return on investment calculation, because it's not as easy and as non-for-profit as it is, or K-12 it is for corporate America, and a way to make sure that our financial resources are targeted where we're getting the biggest set of outcomes. And so it's kind of new, and it's been a little bit hard to educate people this way of thinking, but we made some huge strides this year, and I'm thrilled that our new superintendent is right there partnering with me, making tough decisions. So I hope, did I answer your question?
I'll just add one other thought onto that, Jen, as well, is that part of the review that they did in looking at the key indicators for each of the contracts is also about reevaluating, in some cases, whether or not some contracts were ones where we had multiple that could be one. So I think that's also going to be a part of what they're doing with the ones that are below 200,000, is assessing whether or not they're producing results, but then also, are we managing that contract as a district the correct way? Because I think that's the other part of why we have more than 800 contracts, is that we have 60 plus schools that all have different needs, that in some cases we dealt with things as they came up, which is really important to do. But now that we're in a position where we can do a better assessment, you may see that number drop tremendously from that 100,000 below.
Right. So, for example, we had one vendor who had 27 different contracts with individual schools. And so we want to make sure that we're getting a competitive price for the whole district, and that we're managing that and that we're properly competitively pricing it. So sometimes when you do individual, and nobody's intentionally doing anything wrong, but when individual school wants to do something, they go out and do it. But when it realizes a certain financial threshold, we have to go out and bid it. So that's another thing we're doing. In addition to that, we're looking at every outsourced contract as to whether it still makes sense to continue to outsource it or bring it back in-house. And so, the wave of the late 80s, early 90s was to outsource everything. And so I think it's time to reevaluate whether we're getting the service that we need, and whether it's better to do it in-house or not. So we're going through those evaluations as well.
Yeah, I think just hearing that some contracts were identified as not sort of being in compliance with sending it out for RFP is, just from an audit perspective and a risk reduction perspective, I think that's really great that you guys are doing that and identified those and are going to tie those up and eliminate that area of risk. So.
And we can certainly keep a running report out as to our progress to the audit committee. Because we appreciate the support and the structure.
This one isn't connected. Oh, it might be on now. No buttons. I'll just guess which ones.
You're sitting in my seat, Christine.
Oh, so you must intuitively know just how the microphone responds to you. I love the effort of consolidating and looking at the contracts district-wide. How do you balance that with local school budgeting and decision-making and allowing for those kind of two principles to hold true at the same time?
That's a great question. So the schools have a need, right? And as long as we can find a competitive and quality service to meet that need with the best financial impact for the district. It'll be done in partnership. It's not central office dictating to the schools. They're still decision makers in the process. And so it'll be a joint partnership. They'll be part of that whole RFP process and helping to determine who best fits that need. But and then we also have our supplier diversity goals that, with minority business, women-owned business, local businesses that we try to support. And so it's a fine dance to make sure that we get the right thing.
Okay, any final comments or questions? Okay, we can move on, Lauren, to the audit status report and your mid-year evaluation.
Great, thank you. So I will first start with the audit status report. You're welcome to follow along with me, but I will just hit the highlights of each of our projects that were contained in our fiscal 2023 internal audit plan. And advisory projects, and as a reminder for those who may be listening, our advisory projects are those that are management-led, and internal audit serves as consultants and advisors to add value, do analysis, and provide feedback throughout their projects. So the first project that we have been keeping you abreast of is our cash controls and minimization project, where we are partnering with the Treasurer's Office accounts receivable team to help identify further controls, but ultimately to help minimize the cash that is exchanging hands throughout the district. So one thing to highlight in terms of progress since we last reported out is that we are getting close to performing joint visits with the accounts receivable team out to the school sites to do some cash audits. We understand this is the first time we've done this, so I think really our goal for this is to learn what's the current status, what's the opportunity, and help educate those at the school level. So that's coming up here soon. And then further, we are meeting with AR on a weekly basis to help advise on the crowdfunding donations process, identifying some tools that potentially could serve the district holistically and help streamline some of that process as well. So more to come on those, but great progress being made. The next area is transportation expenditures. So I know this is obviously a huge focus of the district as well as this committee. So just to refresh everyone, we performed a full expenditure audit back in fiscal 2019. And so as different iterations of leadership have come into the role, we've partnered with them to educate them on the key takeaways, our findings, and recommendations. So where we are now is with new transportation leadership in place. They're working to identify who on their team, the management person, responsible for owning the transportation financial aspects. So we've been in partnership having conversations about what skill set would that person group resource need to have to be successful. And so right now they are working through identifying that resource. And once they are determined, we'll partner with them and do, as I mentioned before, the educational aspects, and then ultimately provide advisory support and consultation as they move into that role. The next item is very timely, relating right back to our previous conversation around contracts management. So again, this is a management-led, as you can see, a management-led project, ROI, the contracts conversation relating to just what we were speaking about. So we've met with our new contracts analyst and will continue to serve as a partner as he works through identifying some of those KPIs that we were mentioning just before. How do we measure? How do we create criteria and hold our contractors accountable? So that's a piece that we are pleased to be a part of, as it's very relevant, very current, and I think it's a great opportunity. So moving on to our assurance projects, our predominant focus, since we have now concluded, as we'll discuss in executive session, we've now concluded our security badge access audit. So our predominant focus has shifted over the past month or so to the follow-up audit of benefits. So that is a big piece that we're working through, making progress, and hope to share a report with you in the coming months. That concludes the audit status report from an internal audit perspective, and you can see on the final page of the report a status of external audits. You can see there are a great deal of ODE audits, reviews, self-assessments underway, which is very typical. That occurs on an annual basis, as well as our financial audit being performed by Plattenberg on behalf of the Ohio Auditor of State. There was a concluded audit and review completed by ODE, and that was just marked as complete. We only really hear if there's an issue and none to be reported, which is great news. So that concludes the status update, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
External audits and reviews. Maybe you could send out a little update. I don't even really know what all these different things are, and maybe also some sense of when they would be completed. I mean, and also, I know that the timing of the year isn't correct now, but at some point in this year, it'd be interesting to hear. I always like to hear the impact of the advisory and assurance audits, what kind of impact that they have made or maintained for the district.
Absolutely.
That's not asking too much.
No, not at all. And that's been a big piece from an internal audit return on investment standpoint as we've developed. How do you quantify? And that's something we take very seriously and are still working through. So I am interested to pull some of my colleagues too to see what ways they go about measuring. So I hear you, and I certainly hold that as a priority. And then in terms of the grants explanations, maybe we could do and I'm volunteering someone, our grants manager perhaps could come and speak and give some insight into they are so heavily audited, and she could really speak to what each of these are and kind of their annual process if, Jen and Treasurer's Office would be on board with a presentation like that.
The question of curiosity, how much crowdfunding is actually going on?
So we've learned there are some reports and data available that shows us the amount of crowdfunding that we are receiving through one specific platform. So through this project, we'll put all that together, and then as Mr. Cross had alluded to, perhaps the impact of those advisory projects, we can package that all up. I just don't know that it's been shared with senior leadership yet, so I hate to put the cart before the horse. But there are notable amounts that I think we can add additional processes and controls to. But I definitely will bring that back once it's been reported internally and share with you all as well, if that's okay. Wonderful. Oh, yes.
Yeah. So we've added some resources in this department over the last several years. Do you feel like sort of the output and the volume of work that you're being able to produce, or the depth, are you seeing sort of those outcomes at this point?
Tremendous. difference in having this team. I mean, I think it's night and day. I think I was able to get by when I was figuring out what does internal audit at CPS look like. But it's truly, like I said, night and day with this team. We're able to do more projects concurrently, as well as the diversity of our skill set between IT specializations, our district-specific knowledge. We're able to attack a project from many more dimensions than we previously would have. So our real goal as we develop between now and coming years is to take us from an audit shop who can perform projects, and now we're an audit shop who can perform concurrent projects, which is great, but to get us to the point of being Red Book compliant, the Institute of Internal Auditor standards. We don't claim to be, although I do believe we are making great progress. I really want us to get to that level, and having this team is what we need. You need the difference between a preparer and the reviewer control, all of those levels. And now we finally have that structure in which we could take steps closer to being a fully compliant audit shop. So to answer the question about the return on investment, I really would love to quantify that's where we're headed, but just anecdotally, it's tremendous. And I truly thank this committee for the support to get to this place.
What further needs to happen to be fully compliant? I'm not an internal auditor, so I'm not familiar with all of those.
Yes, great question. So one of the things that we had shared and probably didn't provide enough context around when we did our fiscal 23 risk assessment and plan, where we said, what's the most important things? One of the things that I think maybe we want to think about as we move into fiscal 24 would be that internal audit development. We kind of put it under this broad category, but what that really means is looking at developing a procedural manual that ties the standards to what we actually do on a daily basis within our audits and as the shop operates holistically. And so that's our next step, is to take what we think we do, match it up with the standards, and then formally document and adopt that, and then hold ourselves accountable to the IA standards. So that's a piece where I think we could utilize an external accounting firm to say, here's what we have, here's where you need to be, and help us, create a connection between the two. And I think that might be, with the audit committee's perspective, that's something I just want to toss and have you all think through, but that's my next professional goal for this department. I think it would be, while I do believe we are respected and people value our work, I think that stamp of compliance would really set us apart and take us to the next level. So I hope that kind of answered the question, but I just want to loop back to some of our previous conversations around it.
Okay, Lauren, do you want to go over this mid-year process for your evaluation? Or
Yeah, I can just hit through the high points really quickly, and I'm happy to take feedback, questions, anything further, but I'll just start simply with this is the mid-year evaluation based on the goals that were set by myself and approved by the committee at the beginning of the fiscal year. And so I report out high level some of the progress that has been made. However, I do believe our audit status reports, things like that, have more information in them. So the request would be that if you have feedback that you'd like to share, that you could send to Dan Holthouse. I included his email. If possible, sending that over to him by Friday, January 20th, so a week from this upcoming Friday. That would be fantastic. And then what he will do is complete the last page of this document based on the feedback he received, as well as his own perspective. And I also hope to ask the board to provide some feedback to Dan as well. And then he'll submit that to our Director of Talent and Acquisition, so then she can formalize the mid-year. So I really do appreciate the feedback. I think we have a lot of good goals, and I think we're, like I said, equipped to start to make good progress towards them. And I do value the feedback, though, as to what we can do differently or keep doing. So any questions before I conclude on the mid-year?
if anyone wants to give me feedback via email or call me or talk after the meeting, we can do that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Lauren. We are now going to go into executive session to discuss the security audit. There's some sensitive information that that we have talked to the council, and this qualifies for executive session. So I will ask for someone to motion to go into executive session. If I could have that motion.
I make a motion that we move into executive session.
Okay, thank you. Could I have a second? Okay, Jim, second. So now we need to do a roll call vote, and I'll ask Lauren to handle the roll call for us.
Absolutely. Dan Holthouse, Jim Crossett,
Yes.
Christine Fisher,
Yes.
David Foote, Liz Guttridge,
Yes.
Paul Kitzmiller,
Yes.
Carol Mitchell Lawrence,
Yes.
Ms. Bolton, Mr. Craig.
Yes.
Thank you.
We got,
Okay, so I think that means we're in executive session. So we'll turn the videos off and